My question, now I'm going to turn to the panel, first is to Claire, which is, Claire, do you agree with my characterization of where we are?
Essentially, I don't. I mean, I think we've lived. I can see around the room lots of familiar faces. I'm sure we've lived with these. We've lived with these issues for a very long time, and certainly it has been a very long time since I heard for the first time that the film industry would go the same way as the music industry. And I think that given that it's 2010, it's worth reflecting on why that didn't happen and why that's unlikely to happen, in my opinion. And I mean, I've worked with a number of people in the audience to assess some of these risks, and I apologize very much for having missed Ben's talk, which I would have been extremely pleased to hear. But in essence, you know, as Terry has said, the box office trend is actually very positive. And with the games industry, the film industry is one of the only visible global growth industries in the content space. That's certainly not the case with television programming, for instance, or indeed advertising, which supports many content models. So I think reflecting on why the movie industry is actually very well positioned is, first of all, the point you made about scale. These are very scale intensive models, exploiting product all over the world. Having even digitizing content is not for the faint-hearted. And I think also the movie industry has benefited from being event-driven. So this is something that has proved to be very robust. I mean, I have a great factoid, if you want it, which is that U2 will make $750 million in gross revenues from their tour, and they will probably never pay back the advance on their album. So, I mean, the industry has shifted very strongly. Music industry has shifted very strongly towards live. I think the importance of liveness in the music industry, in the movie industry, supports it very much. And also the whole cannot be disintermediated. I mean, the music industry, an album became 10 songs. Newspapers have become articles. The editorial whole has been disintermediated. And, of course, user-generated content has much more legs in a text-based culture or indeed in a music-based culture than when people expect 3D, which is also another issue, which is that movie industry is actually benefiting from technology change in a way that is really not evident in any of the content industry. And finally, the models themselves in the developed world are actually moving in the right direction for the movie industry. The payverse is growing. Although DVD sales have declined very strongly, there are signs that actually the specificity of a studio, which is its ability to play in the multimedia universe, is actually something that strengthens the global dominance of the existing studios. And by that I mean playing across websites, monetization through books and toys and so forth. Now, obviously, the key problems remain the same. Piracy and the fact that emerging markets do not deliver the returns that they should technically because of piracy in all its forms. And I think that's again a global issue, but one in which the movie studios at least have not suffered as much as they thought they would. Now, obviously, 2010, we're on the cusp of high-speed rollouts, in a number of major territories. We'll see whether that increases the prevalence of piracy of movies, which it may well do. That's certainly been the case in France. So I think that high-speed access is a real concern, and probably a greater concern than it's ever been before. And then finally, I think there's been a lot of disappointment in VOD models across the piece, whether they're sort of retail models through iTunes or indeed monetization models and VOD. Pay-per-view revenues in particular have been in decline across all the major markets. But that actually you can see that the payverse is growing in aggregate, and so therefore there are trade-offs within that too. So I would say that, lucky to be working in a studio, lucky to be a studio in this global world with global franchises to exploit, and unlucky to be in any other space.
Claire, the question that arises from your contribution is, you suggest almost that the studios are lucky just to be where they are and they can just sit tight. We know that historically there's a decline in margins. We know that the new media is very difficult to monetize, but it is leaching away in terms of numbers, in terms of volume, in terms of consumption. Is it enough for the studios just to say, we're not music, we're not going to face the same chaos as broadcast TV, we're okay? Or should they be doing something more proactive?
Certainly, we have all the studios as customers, and I see no lack of proactivity. I mean, these are some of the finest minds being applied to all of these problems, and the fact that they've eluded simple answers for people who own newspapers to people who own TV content, should actually, underline the difficulty of dealing with algorithm-driven models. I mean, Adam and I worked together to secure copyright settlements for music publishers from iTunes and mobile operators in the in the UK, but then subsequently I did that in the US. And these algorithm-driven models are they dismiss the value of content, as indeed all forms of piracy are also algorithm-driven models, and that is very hard to deal with, and it's very hard to stay ahead of that. And I think that, obviously, if you look back at the UK in particular, I was working with Josh Berger in 2003 on, I think you can remember this, Lavinia, on getting the ISPs to accept that they would choke off movie piracy in the initial stages of broadband. And there was an agreement in place. And the content industry, I think, very much to your point about being a bit slow on the uptake, really missed the music industry and the film industry missed a seismic opportunity to get the ISPs to choke off piracy before it became a very widespread phenomenon. And I think that's a mistake, but I don't think they're going to make that mistake again. And I see them as extremely active in attempting to monetize. And above all, in exploiting the multimedia value of their brands. I mean, if you look at kids' consumption in particular, you can't sell any character in books or magazines without there being a TV or a movie tie-in. And that actually so strengthens the opportunities for English language-driven models. I mean, there are 900 million English language speakers, and it's going younger and younger. So, I mean, I have to say that this is the tide of technology is lifting these studios, whether they like it or not, towards a better future, which is, now obviously they spend like Billy O on their productions and the celebrities have all the power and blah, blah, blah. But, those are cost issues. And of course, all creative industries end up by managing industries for themselves. I mean, we've seen that in the music industry, which has a negative margin, but that hasn't stopped the studio bosses from paying themselves an arm and a leg. That's a different issue. That's about management culture, but it's not about how it is that they're dealing with technology. If they overpay their people, lucky them that they can get away with it.